second. Smile like you mean it. Right here. All right, just throw him over the front.
Well, nobody's helping me.
Information on your next stop, the Apollo Saturn V Center. It opened in December 1996 and has since become a must-see for any visitor at Kennedy Space Center, including some pretty famous people. And of course, many of the astronauts who went to the moon in the late 60s and early 70s. During the ride over, you're going to hear from a couple of them. So once again, when you hear this sound, glance up at the monitor for the real eyewitness story on what this place was like during the Apollo era. Next stop,
There was a time when a different kind of spacecraft passed through those doors and into history. In this scene from the film Apollo 13, actor Tom Hanks is giving a VAB tour. It was shot on location right here.
I'm Gene Cernan, commander of Apollo 17, our last manned mission to the moon. There were only 15 of the giant Saturn V rockets ever built, and 12 launched successfully. Only 3 Saturn V's remain in existence. You'll see one of them in just a few minutes. Refurbished by NASA to Smithsonian standards and moved inside for display in the Apollo Saturn V Center, a facility, a center that indeed does house the spirit of Apollo. Being only a couple miles from on-site, where we left to go to the moon, I think is significant. There's also a very human side to what began here at Kennedy Space Center 30 years ago. Here's Jim Lovell describing the high point of his experience in space.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we travel down through here, you can see the immense size of the VAB. Those doors on the VAB is 456 feet tall. They weigh over 80 tons apiece. And before we open them, it takes...
Our exhibit hall is home to many items from the Apollo program. Along with the Saturn V rocket, we have the lunar rover that the astronauts used in training. There's an Apollo command module and a lunar module. Be sure to see an actual moon rock that is on display inside the Moon Rock Cafe, or touch a moon rock. That exhibit is located near the entrance to the Lunar Theater. We invite all of you to experience Neil Armstrong's historical first landing on the moon. That is shown in the Lunar Theater, and our Lunar Theater is located next to the nose end of the Saturn V rocket, and that's located at the opposite end of our exhibit hall. And now it is with great pride that we present the story of NASA's historic Apollo program. That's the greatest adventure that humankind has ever experienced. Once again, we do ask that there is no smoking and no flash photography. Thank you.
When I was a kid, I used to dream about flying through space. Every week on TV, I watched my heroes as they jumped into their rocket ships and took to the stars. And I wanted to be like them. They had courage, imagination, and no problem ever stood in their way for long. You know, again, when we actually did send men into space, it turned out that those were exactly the qualities it took. I'm John Hudson. This is Pad 39 of the Kennedy Space Center. I was a launch controller here when from this very spot, man took off to fly to the moon. It was a journey that began 12 years before that rocket ever left the ground. And it started on the other side of the world. Back then, we were one of two superpowers that always seemed to be on the edge of a terrible war. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched the first ever man-made satellite into Earth orbit. They called it Sputnik, which means traveling companion. And in a world where peace hung in a delicate balance, it seemed to create a dangerous advantage. Every ham radio operator in America could hear the beacon. People were afraid. Were the Soviets looking down on us, watching us? If they could make a satellite pass over our cities, could they do the same with a bomb? Our own space program kicked into high gear, and less than 2 months later, we were ready to launch our own satellite, Explorer 1. Even further behind. Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first man into space, circling the world in just 89 minutes. We had our own astronauts, and they were eager and ready to take the big ride. But our manned space program couldn't seem to get off the ground. We stuck with it, and on May 5th, 1961, things finally started going right. Astronaut Alan Shepard took his ship Freedom 7 6.5 miles into space. America had its first space hero. Just a few days later, our space program received a new challenge. But this one did not come from the Soviet Union. It came from our young president. In one inspiring moment, he changed the mission from one based in fear of the present to one of hope for the future.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why 35 years ago fly the Atlantic? Why does Christ play Texas?
Sure?
We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon.
Really? There's the baby.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
We hadn't been more than 16 minutes into space, and now we were going to the moon. We would have to design a rocket the size of a 36-story office building, put it together with the precision of a microscope, and accelerate it to the speed of a bullet. Then we would have to guide it to a moving target 250,000 miles away. Many people thought it was an impossible dream, but 400,000 of us set about making that dream a reality. It would be the longest, most hazardous voyage that any man had dared to attempt. But step by step, mission by mission, we orbited the Earth, perfecting the skills and technologies we would need on this incredible journey. Our astronauts practiced maneuvering, docking, and the 1,000 other tasks that would comprise the moon mission. We created new alloys, lighter and stronger than anything seen before. We designed communication systems that would be reliable over the vast distances. And behind it all, we tried to perfect the rocket that would be powerful enough to punch out of Earth orbit and take us to the moon. One day, however, the dream of flying to the moon almost slipped away. It was January 27th, 1967. Astronauts Virgil Gus Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee were on board Apollo 1 for a plugs-out test, a full-scale dress rehearsal for the actual launch. Suddenly it happened. There was a fire in the capsule. 3 men whose lives had been in our hands were lost.
Surely the opening vistas of space promise high costs and hardships, as well as high reward. But this country country of the United States was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them.
After Apollo 1, some thought we'd failed, and that the moon was out of our reach. But we owed it to those men to learn from their sacrifice and to carry on. We started taking the Apollo vehicle apart, piece by piece. Was the design flawed? Had safety been compromised? Tough questions. And we spent 1.5 years redesigning the spacecraft so that no astronaut's life would ever be at risk because we overlooked something or because we could have done something better. A moon rocket is 91% high explosive, and it goes into the most unforgiving, hazardous environment there is. We could never make it risk-free, and the men who flew them knew that. We didn't send men into space again until Apollo 7 orbited the Earth testing some of the new designs. When everything worked perfectly, the decision was made. The next mission would travel to the moon. It was mankind's destiny to leave the shores of our planet behind and strike out across the vast ocean of space. In the great span of our history, now was the time that we could. Now was the time that we would. We stood on the eve of the longest, most dangerous journey that any man had ever undertaken. And it would be taken by Frank Borman, James Lovell, and William Andrews, the crew of Apollo 8. Through those doors, you'll find the firing room, launch control, just as it was on December 21st, 1968.
Hey, ladies and gentlemen, please watch your step in the fire room.
This is the actual launch room, right? Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
Each individual system had been tested, but what we didn't know was how they would perform when all 2 units began to work together. That moment would come when the countdown clock reached 0. If a maneuvering thruster failed, if communications broke down, if navigation was off by 1 degree, if any piece of the miles of wiring, circuits, relays, or valves was defective, Frank Borman, Jim Lovell, and Bill Andrews would pay with their lives. As they sat, waiting for launch on that chill December morning, these 3 astronauts were back to what they had always been, test pilots. You are now in the final minutes before the launch of Apollo 8, right here where it actually happened. Mankind is about to leave his planet behind and journey to another. It is one of those rare moments when history is not being made, destiny is being embraced.
Attention all personnel, the countdown clock will start on my mark at T-3 minutes. 3, 2, 1, mark.
This is launch control, T-3 minutes and counting. We completed our communications checks with the Apollo 8 astronauts in Canada, and the communications are go.
We verify prep complete on T-line bar. T-line bar, you are cleared for final command.
In this period, once we do get the final